When people think of scandals in the watch industry, they often think of these super sensational stories involving individual rogue dealers, YouTubers who turn out to be scammers, counterfeiters on the fringes, or short-lived black market rings. But no scandal in modern horological history quite compares to the Jaquet Affair of the early 2000s. This was a saga that implicated one of the Swiss watch industry's own, a well-connected insider with a history of theft, counterfeiting, and jail time, who managed to build a thriving business that supplied parts to some of the biggest names in watchmaking. The unraveling of Jean-Pierre Jaquet under the Raiders' empire involved stolen gold, fake Rolexes constructed partly from real parts, armed robberies, and even drive-by shootings in the heart of Switzerland's watchmaking region. So for this video, we will piece together this somehow nearly forgotten episode. So buckle up. This is a story of ambition, greed, betrayal, and the surprisingly lenient fallout that followed. Right before we get into it, I want to quickly preface this by saying that all this went down in the 90s and early 2000s. Though there are articles available online, the internet wasn't what it is today in 2003, and I had to translate lots of French news articles for this. So if you know something that I haven't covered, please leave a comment down below so we can get an even better picture of this huge scandal. So now, without wasting any more time, let's get into it. Jean-Pierre Jaquet began his journey in Swiss watchmaking in the 1980s. Initially, he was known around La Chaux-de-Fonds, one of Switzerland's watchmaking capitals, still is, as a vintage dealer, parts supplier, and sometimes machinist. But it's not unusual in Swiss watchmaking to kind of blend salesmanship with fabrication. Many individuals and smaller companies do specialized finishing or supply ébauchés, which is basically unfinished movement, so no fancy finishings on them yet, to bigger brands. Jaquet, however, stood out for his connections and high volume business. Even though he had already served jail time for theft and counterfeiting prior to founding Jaquet SA in the 1990s, he somehow maintained, or at least cultivated, good standing with major watch brands. According to an article in the Neue Zürcher Zeitung, Jaquet's ambition started early in life, and so did his love for fancy things. He quickly discovered his talent for making money and started out as a pawnbroker, but also dealt with antiques and scrap gold. Rumor in and around La Chaux-de-Fonds had it that he was hanging around in nightclubs and that he frequented cabarets. When he was attacked one night and beaten up in front of such an establishment, he didn't press charges, all kinds of odd behavior that would distance himself from the very uptight and very conservative, still is, I think, Swiss watch business community. He was known to be, according to some commentary, abrasive, aggressive sometimes, ambitious and overbearing, but his skill at securing contracts and delivering specialized parts made him a sought-after resource. By the time he established his own factory, he had attracted high-profile customers that reportedly included names like Gérard Perregaux, you've heard Maurice Lacroix, Richemont affiliates, the earliest iterations of F.P. Journe, and the British Masters, it's a holding company behind Graham, Arleson, and Tompion. Reading about that made me think of how persuasive Mr. Jaquet must have been back then, because, even then, with his probably well-known criminal past and record, and the fact that on a personal level he appeared to be not really well-liked, heavily disliked even, he managed to close so many deals and to become such an influential figure. And so, Jaquet SA built its reputation by specializing in finishing mainly Valjoux movements, unfinished mechanical movements once widely available, and creating complications for various watchmakers. Essentially, Jaquet SA was what you would call a white label supplier. It had no brand, watch brand of its own, but was integral to many famous watch houses' products. Through these collaborations, Jean-Pierre Jaquet became what some even considered a kingpin, like a major kingpin in the local industry, because so many brands were relying on them for their movements and the finishing of it. And he offered his white label services at a time when they were desperately needed. The watch industry just started to heal after the devastating quartz crisis in the 80s and 70s, and he dominated that market like none other. According to the Neue Zürcher Zeitung, Jaquet also used his money to foster young and upcoming watchmaking talent, such as Franck Müller himself, made a video about him, which would later be something that would cost him his freedom, actually. Still, few people profess to truly like him on a personal level, and he got the nickname Le Pharaon, the Pharaoh, for his way of doing business and being in the control of so much gold and market share in the industry. So he kept on doing his business, and he did it so very successfully. I couldn't find a reference or source for this information, but according to Grail Watch Wiki, Jaquet SA generated sales of about 22 million Swiss francs, which would be about 24.5 million US dollars in 2002, the same year which got the ball rolling and marked the beginning of the end for a lot of people, because in 2002, two startling armed robberies hit the Swiss watchmaking community. In January 22, Miranda, it's a finishing workshop located in the same city as Jaquet SA, in La Chaux-de-Fonds, that provided final finishing on gold Rolex cases, was robbed in broad daylight by gunmen who allegedly made off with as many as 1,000 gold Rolex watch cases, which they assumed should be then, that's like the police and the public, should be used in piecing together partly counterfeited watches. Jose Miranda, I guess that's how you pronounce his name, the owner of the finishing workshop himself, was found out to be complicit with the robbery. He made a statement in which he explained that he supplied Jaquet with the gold. It took some time, and I could only find one source that would state this, for the news to come out that the stolen goods weren't actually like proper watch cases, but very basic case bags, what would be very difficult to be transformed into replica watches. But after all the media hype and Jaquet being the perfect person to blame, nobody cared about that fact. And then not even half a year later, in June, another factory, RSM in Le Loc, which is about a 15-minute drive from La Chaux-de-Fonds, was held up at gunpoint, this time for about 10 kilograms of solid gold, reportedly valued at several hundred thousand Swiss francs. I could find this scan of a newspaper from that time, and in French it reads, "On a Thursday around 10:30 p.m., two armed men threatened the boss of the RSM turning factory located above this enclosed courtyard. Before forcing him to open the safes, the victim and an employee were tied up and immobilized. By the time the boss managed to free himself and alert the police, the gangsters had fled, taking 10 kilograms of gold with them." So as you can see, the things that happened here, they weren't just petty theft or opportunistic burglaries. They were major orchestrated heists that took a lot of time and planning. Police investigations soon pointed to inside information being used by the robbers. In the midst of all this, there was also this 35-year-old with no clear ties to the watch industry that was arrested for possessing or fencing gold stolen from the RSM facility. And around that point, the police allegedly had already tapped Jean-Pierre Jaquet's phone. The capture of this 35-year-old led investigators to a growing web of connections and eventually to the guy Jean-Pierre Jaquet himself. Reporters Markus Studler and Daniel Hug, writing for the Neue Zürcher Zeitung in October of 2003, laid out the climax of the police investigation. On October 7th in the morning, Swiss authorities swooped into the Jaquet SA's factory in a big raid, arresting Jaquet himself alongside nearly a dozen alleged co-conspirators. Investigators had uncovered ties between his factory and the earlier robberies, but what they found inside the premises sent shockwaves through the Swiss watch industry. And I think no one could have imagined at that point the scope of things before entering the building, because what police found was nothing short of shocking at that time, and I think still is. They turned up evidence of the mass production of counterfeit Rolex watches that incorporated actual Rolex parts, like those stolen from the Miranda robbery, that were used to assemble Franken watches, to make them more convincing. So that's mixing authentic parts with fake ones. Then they also discovered the stolen gold from the RSM robbery, as I've mentioned, and alleged stocks of Franck Müller watch parts, and even rumors of counterfeit Swatch Group and Richemont products alongside of it. It's very interesting. Jaquet never really denied nor confessed to anything in court. He simply stated the truth according to him. The Neue Zürcher Zeitung article states that Jaquet had a very simple explanation for the fact that police found tons, and I mean thousands, of Franck Müller watches without serial numbers at his factory, watches that couldn't be found in any catalog of the brand. He had, according to him, worked with Müller for the past 15 years, and those watches were simply part of the research and development work, watches that were never meant to be sold or go into sale. According to Jaquet, the police had absolutely no idea what they got in their hands on, and though this isn't proven, there were also rumors that Jaquet was also responsible for the theft of an Ulysse Nardin prototype watch, because that one got stolen from a workshop in Le Loc around the same time, so it all kind of mixed together, but there's also no proof of that. He wasn't, I think, convicted on this. I couldn't find where or when he said it, but also Tim Mosso, who did a video on this, who quoted Nicolas Hayek Sr., said that this whole thing, the fact that this was all instigated by a watch industry insider, was like finding out that cardinals had robbed the Vatican Bank, which I think is a very interesting quote on this whole situation. The notion that this was happening, not in hidden backroom operation in Asia or shadowy corner of Europe, but in a legitimate Swiss factory that regularly supplied well-known brands. It just was scandalous. And this is so intense, so crazy. Before everything came out to the public, which was, then later to be known as the Jaquet Affair, and even before the raids in 2003, strange events hinted at what was brewing behind closed doors in the La Chambre de France factory. Actual drive-by shootings were reported at the building, and there were alleged threats against the family, the Jaquet family, strong enough that he supposedly carried a gun for protection everywhere he went, and shots were reportedly fired into the offices at the factory. I think that must have been a crazy time to work there. Yet again, Jaquet did not report these threats or attacks to the authorities. This silence, which, might otherwise seem bizarre, made a lot more sense once the, raid revealed the factory's hidden counterfeit operations. The consensus among journalists was that anyone under threat, would normally rush to the police. Of course, I think you and me would do that too. But if you were up to no good, the last thing you would want is law enforcement peering more closely into your business. Investigations also revealed that co-conspirators were allegedly threatening and coercing one another to prevent anyone from becoming the weak link who, might talk to the police. So you've had that happening at the same time too. As the Swiss police, began wiretapping Jaquet as early as mid-2002, I believe, building their case. The conspirators frantically tried to keep the scheme on the wraps and, hence all this intimidation tactics and all of the shootings, so that was explained later on then. By 2008, the criminal proceedings culminated with a total of 34 people indicted in the Jaquet Affair. According to Radio Television Suisse, on September 1st in 2008, final verdicts were handed down, and Jean-Pierre Jaquet received a 4.5-year prison sentence, a restitution payment of 750,000 Swiss francs, which is about $836,000. And the prison sentence was cut short, actually, because he had already served about 14 months in detention since 2003. And all that while he had already been previously convicted. This wasn't someone who, had never been in contact with the law like that before. He has already served jail time for theft and counterfeiting. And I mean, that's insane. Even at the time, observers found the sentence surprisingly lenient given the charges, which were armed robbery, or at least complicity or accessory, theft of precious metals, a large-scale intellectual property violation against Rolex, and the possession of stolen goods, among other small offenses. There was also conspiracy, intimidation, potential witness tampering also hung in the air. So why only 4.5 years? Well, some speculated that Jaquet knew too much about bigger players and more extensive wrongdoing within the industry, and a deeper probe might have brought unwelcome scrutiny to other established brands, but never know for sure, of course. Whatever the reason, by I think it was 2009 or 10, he was briefly released on appeal before finishing out a reported remaining 16 months. And I absolutely have to agree with Tim Mosso here, who mentioned it in his podcast about the whole situation. There's just no way the punishment fits the crime here, especially considering that Switzerland, and I mean Rolex in particular, is notoriously harsh when it comes to counterfeiting and intellectual property infringements. They don't joke around with that. But when you start to dig deeper and deeper, you realize that at the end, from the huge pile of charges, only very few were left on which he was convicted on. And according to reports from his trial, his biggest probably weren't necessarily all the charges, but his attitude towards the court and his personality. It seems that even in court, he was being arrogant, dismissive, and just very nonchalant about everything, making him also, to the outside, just the perfect person to blame for all of this, since he was disliked from the beginning and kept on doing so, which obviously made it very difficult for people to give him the benefit of the doubt. There's an example for it. They found this solid gold Bulgari watch in his possession, and then experts from Bulgari themselves attested that they have no record of this watch. No one could figure out where this watch comes from, and no one believed Jaquet when he explained that this was a prototype commissioned by the late Bulgari boss Bruno Spar before he died. And then only when Jaquet was released, he could produce the missing evidence. It was like a hand-signed order, a form of something like that, that proves his version of the story. And still, the watch, alongside thousands of others, still remain in the evidence rooms at the police. And now, if you would think that this would have been the end for the Jaquet SA, you'd actually be wrong. In 2005, Jaquet SA, minus its founder's direct involvement, was renamed La Jouperet, retaining much the same workforce and physical factory. And so here at this point, I like to cut in and say that I do believe that from this point on, it wouldn't be fair to insinuate that La Jouperet is still involved in some shady business just because its previous owner was, clearly mixed into it. It's just very interesting to me to see that they kept on with the business because it was, even subtracting all the criminal activity, obviously highly successful. So soon after renaming, La Jouperet brought back Arnold & Son as an in-house brand, and in 2012, the Citizen Watch Company purchased both La Jouperet and Arnold & Son, incorporating them into, their portfolio as its high-end Swiss manufacturing hub. And then 3 years later, in 2015, Citizen resurrected Angelus through La Jouperet, aiming to position it as an even higher tier within its Swiss stable. So we know what happened to the company, but what happened to the person? Well, unofficial reports suggest that Jaquet might still be involved, at least peripherally, in the watchmaking world. There are only very few details public, which I think further just highlights how effectively the industry had buried this story. Outside of, scattered references in Swiss or French newspapers, plus niche watch industry publications, the scandal has all but faded from mainstream memory. It was very hard to research this, and I'm sure there's still so much to uncover here. I myself just stumbled across this because I was doing some research on Angelus, the watchmaker, and then I just happened to stumble upon this whole Jaquet thing that just popped up in combination with Angelus and La Jouperet. So that's how I learned about this. And now you might wonder why I talk about this today. It's now well over 20 years ago. Can't we move on? Well, I would say yes and no. The Jaquet Affair remains one of the, I would say, most dramatic inside job scandals in modern Swiss watchmaking. While, watch thefts and counterfeits are super common, they typically originate from outside the core industry. And Jaquet was not an outsider. He was a legitimate supplier, intimately familiar with the needs and standards of luxury Swiss brands. This proximity and the trust it implied made this betrayal feel far more shocking to the industry insiders I can imagine. And just reading about this is incredible. Jaquet's example also illustrates how connections and reputation can shield wrongdoing, or at least temporarily they do. Despite a known criminal history, he secured orders from top brands, and his operation grew to a size that seemingly gave him significant leverage within this very tight-knit Swiss ecosystem. Gregory Pons, a watch industry expert working alongside Jaquet, once said in an interview that Jaquet was the perfect person to blame because he was a convict, extroverted, and successful. According to him, Jaquet was kind of walking the line, constantly operating on both sides of the legal and illegal side of the businesses. He claimed that watchmakers that high up often produce 1 or 2 pieces more than commission in case, something breaks. Someone commissions 10 watches and they make 12. They don't carry serial numbers, but does that make them replicas? Pons continues by saying that if Jaquet is a criminal, then there are a lot of criminals in this industry. And I think this is exactly the point to leave this story and ask you guys what you think of all this. I'm sure that Jaquet is anything but not guilty, but is he really the supervillain that some outlets make him out to be? I don't know. Though obviously heavily unlike within the industry, he had connections to major brands, and his mild verdict implies that he had at least some form of protection. Whatever it is, it just furthermore proves my assumption that the Swiss watch industry is an incredibly intricate net of all kinds of mysterious business practices shrouded in mystery that has kept its secrets for over a century now. And that is all I have for you guys today. If you have enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up. If you want to watch more videos like this, I recommend subscribing to my channel, and I will see you in my next one. Bye!